It's like Yelp for vendors, They don't have the rating, but they have done a pre-work to see. So there's a whitelist, blacklist vendors, and you could say, okay, can we go with this vendor or not?
Hello and welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Podcast, brought to you by Health Launchpad and HIMSS. I'm Adam Chirinas. I'm Health Launchpad founder and CEO and your host for today. And I want to give a big thank you to my partner HIMSS and also a big thank you to you for joining us today. We hope you find this useful. That's why we do it. And I'm really delighted today to introduce a good friend of mine. Another Austinite, Sunila Levi. Sunila is a long-time healthcare technology executive who's got a really rich experience working across lots of different parts of the healthcare system. And I just thought it'd be just great to have her on the show and get her talking about all the sort of different aspects of healthcare and how they all buy a bit differently. So, Sunila, just say hi. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your background and what your experience.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity to speak on your podcast. And the long time healthcare, I feel like I'm like 70 or 80. But you're right though. 23 years of IT career, last 16 has been in healthcare leadership and management. So do feel like I grew up, But like you said, I live in Austin, Texas, beautiful place, beautiful Austin, Texas, and with my husband and son here. This is home for me. And then, like you said, we both are friends from the Austin HIMSS. Privileged to know you, Adam, there. And per my work, I've been, like I mentioned, 26 years here, 23 years in IT, worked, thankful for my career with the small and large scale organization, being the deputy CTO for Texas Health and Human Services Commission, and then CIO, CTO for Integral Care, and then VP at the second largest hospital system, Common Spirit. So just privileged to have all these roles and experience various things there and build systems and manage and oversee systems and also leadership and management career. And but to the bottom of it, an engineer and an enterprise architect at heart, and love working on healthcare solutions and services.
So one of the things I think is so interesting about your experience is you've worked on both the public side, so state, and local. Integral Care is sort of local, I guess, FQHC, but you've also worked in the non-profit private sector as well. Tell us about what you think the differences are. What are some of the key differences between public and private?
Such a good question. So I also worked for a private company before moving into public. It's Fiserv. I don't know if you've heard of the name Fiserv. Financial company. It's a financial company, and worked as systems engineer there for 6 years. And so very enjoyed working, building systems there, and then went into public sector just out of things happened and I was pulled into public sector and loved the service aspect. So the biggest difference, I would say, is the service aspect of it. It was Texas Workforce Commission, one of the biggest, because Texas is known for being bigger and better. So we're providing workforce solutions and services for entire state of Texas. But then I got pulled into healthcare. And healthcare, HHSC, is very different even from the Public Workforce Commission, where HHSC is mostly for providing services for the underprivileged and low-income population of Texas. So the service aspect is real, providing healthcare for the low-income people, people who are struggling with food, SNAP benefits. So I think one of the biggest differences is the service aspect. And then just imagine the vastness of services for the entire state of Texas. So the second difference is the huge operational budgets. I think last year, 2021, Texas Health and Human Services Commission budget was $33.6 billion. If you have to. So huge operational budgets for these organizations. HHSC is the second largest in service providers, and after TxDOT is the first one, the roads and all the infrastructure, and then healthcare. So second largest, 33.6 billion, just boggles my mind. And Medicaid system alone was like 300 million, I think. So it's the biggest operational budgets. And then the third difference I would say is the management aspect of it. Because of such huge budget and huge responsibility, the management is really regulated for this public versus private. Not that private is not regulated for bigger organizations, but because of the management, third aspect, I would say management is really heavy due to the regulations and the law, the rules that they have to abide by. Management is really heavy. So those are the three big differences, I would say.
Interesting. And when it comes to buying technology, how does, say, a state organization versus, a large IDN or large healthcare organization with a massive footprint, a private organization, how do they buy technology differently?
Massive organizations are kind of similar, Adam. I've worked in both. Common Spirit was second largest organization, and Texas Health and Human Services Commission is one of the biggest healthcare public and state agency. I wouldn't put them. I think they are very careful in buying. They have processes. People process, right? They have groups. Vendor management group is very critical. And then in state, it's the DIR, Department of Information Resource Agency. So what in Texas, what they did is, agencies you cannot go and buy on your own, but use DIR. Department of Information Resource. There is a website you can go and see, and there they list all the approved, vetted vendors and solutions that you could search by and see if DIR has already selected them, have already vetted them. It's like Yelp for vendors, they don't have the rating, but they have done a pre-work to see. So there's a whitelist, blacklist vendors, and you could say, okay, can we go with this vendor or not? And there are opportunities for new vendors also to become to work under a primary vendor that's approved, or a secondary vendor that's approved. So I think more organized with state agencies, especially in Texas with DIR, and with private, I think non-for-profit, Common Spirit, they have like the vendor management offices. But just to touch base, so I would say technology buying is not a simple in any big, massive organization. You cannot go to one vendor and say, give me. There's a process, RFP process.
Yeah.
And in state agencies, it's longer. I would say it's longer than a big, massive organization. Maybe in a big, massive organization, I would say I have experience where we said, okay, we need to move fast because of the timelines, challenges that we have, the legacy system. Let's quicken this, or see how fast can we do. And that's maybe 3 months to 6 months, I would put it in. But with state, I would say forget about months. Plan for years.
So it sounds like the difference is, the pros and cons. So selling to government organizations, particularly states like state of Texas, is that if you can understand the structure, there's a pretty clear structure, and there's a clear set of rules on how you sell to them. The downside is the sales cycles are even longer than they are with a big healthcare system. So let's just flip it around. I want to talk about integral care. So first of all, describe a little bit what integral care is, because it's a really interesting organization. And then the other thing is, so how do they buy technology differently? Because they're smaller than the other organizations.
That's a very good use case, Adam. So Integral Care is a mental health organization, and I'm telling you, one of the biggest business service, or the service that they provide for Texas, especially for Austin and surrounding areas, is the National Suicide Prevention Line. You call 988, and Integral Care call center folks pick it up. It's such a needed, especially when we are coming out of COVID, and mental health is so important. Suicide line. This is suicide line. It's the criticalest service, that our citizens need, and Integral Care is there to provide it. So that's something about Integral Care that's near and dear to my heart, that service. And then I would say is Integral Care is kind of a little bit different animal in that it is a quasi-state, quasi-local, quasi-national because of the National Suicide Prevention Line, and then also private funding. So we also represent, Integral Care is also represented at the World Economic Forum. So it's 4 different funding stream, but the biggest funding stream is the state. So in terms of buying, we still abided, Integral Care still abided by the state DIR.
Right. Okay.
State DIR. So when I was revamping the National Suicide Prevention Line and working with the call center project, modernizing and transforming the call center, I did go to DIR and looked up the vendors there. Who are the approved vendor list? That way I could check off state's requirement that I did go with the DIR vendor list. And then, but I didn't take 2 to 3 years. I did the RFP process, like you're saying, a structured methodology, structured approach. But we did all the paperwork required for that, and then said, who are the top vendors there? And then also applied it to our organization. How does it meet our organization very specific needs? So does that answer your question about?
Yeah. I think it's fascinating because, when you're selling to a local organization like Integral Care, which is a big organization, although it's known as being Austin, as you say, it's got a national footprint because of the suicide line. The interesting thing is, okay, so the rules of the road are you buy by the state rules of the road, but the difference is if you're selling to an organization like Integral Care, if you find the Sunila as your champion, you're the person who's actually going to help that vendor work through the process. Where it sounds like if you selling into the state at the state level, you've got to understand the process. You've got to have that figured out. So it is different. So there's really interesting nuances between the two. And I tell you, so in my own software business, we sold to the not-for-profit healthcare systems, and we're never able to figure out how to sell to public health systems. So I wish I'd met you earlier. Let's just change gears. I want to talk about trusted sources. So, if when you've been in any of those roles, when you were going through a process of finding a vendor, what were your trusted sources as you go through the buying process?
And also, to close off the last point, Adam, there are Sunilas. There are Sunilas in the state agency. Let's say Texas, 39 Sunilas are there, across Texas.
Okay.
They may not be called CIOs, but they are called directors, maybe.
Right.
So I would say find them. So find them, and they are willing to work to solve their agency problems or their local organization problems. So I would leave that last point. And on the trusted sources, I've always gone through, okay, I have a list of vendors, but I have used industry research leaders like Gartner, Forrester, the MQs aspect of it, the hype cycles, the Gartner's resources. So trusted resources, so market vendors getting on those lists have an advantage, saying, okay, they can other third-party people have reviewed their products, and it can stand security, it can scale. All those technology aspects, I do look at from on Gartner's MQ and say, how have they been evaluated? How do they differ from different vendors? So Gartner and Forrester, and then references. For me,
yes.
As a CIO, CTO, it was very critical that these solutions were used by other similar organizations and were proved and had the successful experience. So references for me was key. Was other suicide lines use that vendor, or other vendors use that EHR systems. For me, references were very key too, and talking to the references, not just the vendor is saying that they will do it, but that I could hear it from other organizations.
That's interesting. But what's the sources would you use to stay up to date? Like, just sort of, even if you're not actively looking for something, that sort of things that you read or that you go to stay informed with the latest things that you need to be aware of.
Becker's is one where every day I take a look at it. It's more of an organizational changes, but there is a tech section as well. So tech magazines, Becker's kind of magazines, and health technology magazines are just reading up on it. So putting out the articles, Gartner is a very good resource again, Gartner and Forrester. That's where I would go for on looking up on vendor capabilities and functionality.
Got it. Okay, great. So you've, in your couple of decades of doing this, you've had, I'm sure, 1 million different vendors try and solicit you, market to you. Who do you think, when companies get it right in terms of how they market and sell to you, what is it that you do right? And then the converse of that is, what are your pet peeves?
So, yes, I think as CIO, CTO, as VP, I would get, and as Deputy CEO, I think at least 10 emails. That's the least number I'm thinking per day, Adam, per day. So yes, there is a plethora of vendors saying, hey, we could solve this. This is our product. This is our product. There is that email and cold calls. I would get a call and I don't know who am I talking to, So
I got one about 5 minutes ago during this call. You might have heard my phone going off.
Oh, okay. So,
I get them too.
I wouldn't say it's ineffective. Out of 10, I would think 2 would relate to my real challenges that I'm facing at that moment. And sometimes I would say, hey, let's get back to it. Can you set up some time? But I wouldn't say it's the only strategy as well. I think you have to go that way, but really the effective way, I would say, is bringing the technology leaders together. Once a month, just trying to and really understand what their challenges are. Group up with vendors. If you don't want to, I would say host like a breakfast, host like a coffee or a meetup event. And especially these C-level folks at Integral Care are lone leaders on the top. They are lone. I was the only technology leader. There is only one finance leader. There was only one CSO, strategy leader. They are lone leaders. So bring that organization leader together, or bring the CIOs, CSOs, CFOs together and understand their problem as a group of vendors or as a lone vendor. And then, yes, the outcome will be selling, but first understand the problem, understand the challenges, and become a trusted vendor for them.
Yeah.
I think that's more effective, Adam. Working together, building networks, and then keeping once a month tap and saying, hey, Sunila, how are you doing? Is there anything I can help you with? Like that. And there are always challenges. As a CIO, CTO, there is always challenges that come up. And maybe emailing them on a personal rather than selling, I think that would be. And then the pet peeve for me was going directly to the business leader and trying to sell it rather than hey, the business leader, should we bring in IT? I think that collaboration, because market person, I think marketing or selling would be, if I get this one leader on board, I could do it, but that's adding to the frictional forces down the line, So if you bring the leaders together in the first place, then the frictional forces will be easier and won't be pulling you down, but together they could solve a problem.
Well, what you're describing here is that it is all about relationships, because you become a trusted partner by creating the kind of events and forums like you've described, where you're seen to be genuinely committed and interested in solving the problem and getting people together to do that. And that creates the opportunity to create, a trusted relationship. It's hard as a sales and marketing person. That's, it's hard because you've got targets you've got to hit. So, you've got to balance that with, I've got to that 2 out of 10 emails that work. If 2 out of 10, if 2 out of 10 emails worked, I think most people would be really happy. But you've still got to hit the numbers. So it is a big trade-off for people who are selling to you.
I think it's both. You get small wins. Maybe you need to do both.
Yeah.
Least amount of work to putting effort into it and really learning about their organization.
Yeah.
No, you do. I agree with you. You really do need to do both. All right. So now it's been fascinating learning about the differences and the nuances. I've learned a lot. So as we come to a close here, I've got a question for you that I ask all of our guests, which is, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Thank you, Adam. That's a very good question. Looking back, 23 years. I think when I first started, I would say that the notion of leadership was you have to go at it alone. You read about all these leaders that led, and you want to make an impact, you lead, and there's some sense to it, some sense of truth to it, where you have to lead yourself before leading others. So you have to be motivated, you have to be curious, you have to learn, willing to learn. But I think as I grew in my career, Jack Welch, the CEO of GE, his words come to mind, and I was looking up this morning. He says, keep learning and don't be arrogant by assuming that you know it all. You have the monopoly of truth. Don't think like that. Always assume that you can learn from someone and something. That really rings a bell. And also, I think the word says, right, iron sharpens iron, and then one person sharpens another. So I really think I think if I go back, I would tell myself, influence others, be open, and be influenced by others, and to make an impact. That's what I would say. And don't be so closed or take yourself seriously, but be open.
Well, that was beautifully articulated. That's a really lovely piece of advice. I wholeheartedly agree with you. It's been a great pleasure, Sunila, to have you on the podcast. I really want to thank you for taking the time to do that.
And thank you for your time too.
So before we go, I just want to let listeners know that if you're watching the video, so if you're a listener watching the video, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple or Spotify or any of your favorite podcast channels. You can also, if you're listening to this, you can watch the video. You can see the video through a link in the show notes or through it'll be on healthlaunchpad.com too. We've got lots more guests coming up through the end of the year, and want to again thank you for listening. And if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, please email me at adam@healthlaunchpad.com. And I've got one last request, which is if you found this useful, if you like this, tell 2 friends about it. So thank you very much, everybody. See you on the next one.